Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here at 3TR, and welcome to episode 216 of my weekly Q&A show, top people's questions, where I answer all the questions that you guys have sent me over the past week. We got a pretty solid episode. I wouldn't say it's as big as last week, and just to let you guys know, I will be only answering one question that you guys sent this time. If you guys have any other questions from last week's episode, be sure to check the comments of that video in case you don't hear them here. And to start off, the first one coming from Draven G, and you want to know, do I think movies having a memorable musical score is a rarity these days? I don't think it's that it's a rarity, it's that it just doesn't quite happen as often and we don't expect it. To be honest, the last memorable musical score that I could think of that we've had in probably the past 10 years is maybe the Dark Knight theme. Apart from that, I can't really think of anything. So it's not that it's a rarity, it's that you need a score that fits perfectly with the type of story or type of tone that you're trying to tell. And a lot of movies just have a hard time doing that, or some movies are just not interested in having that special theme that you remember it for. So it's not that it's a rarity, I just don't think that studios or even musical scores are that interested in being remembered on that level. So, not really. The next question comes from Nuz Bentley, and you want to know, what were my thoughts on Dead Space 3, and what do I think could be done to make Dead Space 4 better? Well, to be honest, I know that Dead Space 3 got a lot of negativity, but I didn't think it was that bad. I think it certainly it's definitely the worst of the original three Dead Space games. But I think it was due to the way the story was constructed and the gameplay style of adding co-op, which in my opinion takes a lot of the suspense out. Now, what can they do for Dead Space 4, I would go back to single player, and I think we need, part of me feels like we need to kind of go back to basics. It needs to be set in a secluded area. Dead Space 1 took place on the Ishimura, which was an abandoned space station, and then we ended up going back to Aegis 7. And then when we go back to Dead Space 2, we're trapped on a space station, which has an even bigger situation. Then when you go to Dead Space 3, you're kind of moving from moons and space planets, and you're going through all these ancient ruins. I think we just need to go back to basics. If anything, if you want to make Dead Space 4, either add a new protagonist who has to kind of go through the same thing that Isaac Clarke had to do in the first game, or simply try to tell a different variation of the story, and we need to learn more about exactly what this new religion or Euthytology, or exactly what is the purpose of the Markers, because we tried to get there with Dead Space 3, but I just don't think it was executed as well as it could have been. But that's just what I would do for Dead Space 4. Next question comes from Matthew Vader, and you want to know, which of the 6 God of War games is the best written? I personally think the first one is the best written, with Ghost of Sparta being a good second. What I really liked about the first God of War is that it was told from someone else's perspective. It was being told to us as if it was like an ancient tale. It was being told from us by a guy at that point in time. But I think that the one thing that all the other God of War games, their problem is that they're being told in the moment. We don't have narration. It's kind of being told from Krail's perspective. And I think that kind of weakens the story, because this is really a very one-dimensional story from a very interesting character. So that's why I felt like the first game was very, very strong in that aspect. And I think that it was slightly weakened, but still a very interesting story when we actually got into the origins of his brother and that connection that Kratos had with his brother. And that's why I felt like Ghost of Sparta was the second best, but definitely the first one is the best written. Next question comes from Dr. Hino419, and you want to know, if I had to choose one character that would be my main enemy, who would that be and why? Gotta go into Final Fantasy for this one. They got a lot of really great, interesting villains. But if I had to pick a long-life enemy for all of eternity to hate, that would be Klefka. Klefka is on another level. He initially, in my opinion, has always been the Joker of Final Fantasy, because say what you will about the other villains, they are certainly bad, but at least if you look at their history and how they became that way, there are aspects about their character that are good. I mean, even from examples, Sephiroth. Sephiroth was not always a bad guy. He was at one point, if you played through Crisis Core, is a good guy. Sorceress Edea was being possessed. She was never a bad person, she was just being controlled. Even when you go to Final Fantasy X, there are bad people, but they come from good intentions. People don't believe in their point of view. But Klefka is pure evil. Beginning, middle, and end. I mean, this is what you get if the Joker incarnate had a baby who ended up being crazier than they ever were, and you gave him godlike powers, and he actually achieved it. And so if there was any character throughout all Final Fantasy I would hate to the end of time, it would be him. The next question comes from K Carrot, and you want to know, what is the one storyline that the EU did with the Clone Wars that I did not like flat out or hate, or did I flat out hate? I really, believe it or not, I actually did not like the story that revolved around Yoda during the kind of missing episodes, which was supposed, I believe that was supposed to be like maybe season 7, but I don't think they finished it. And it pretty much went into how Yoda learned how to ascend the Force and survive his physical death. I don't like this aspect of initially the explanation of the Force because it's so inconsistent. Because apparently we all know that only Jedis can become Force ghosts, but how is this actually done? We know for a fact that just because you're a Jedi and you fight for the light, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to survive and become a Force ghost. But for Yoda, it just felt like he had to do a little bit too much. I mean, how did Qui-Gon do this? Did he have to go through this whole thing? How did Obi-Wan do this? I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi, all he did for 20 years is just meditate in the Force on Tatooine while watching after Luke. I mean, is that all it takes? I mean, if anything, how did Anakin do this? I'm sorry, if there's one thing about Return of the Jedi that makes no sense, you cannot be a Sith Lord for 20 plus years, kill thousands of people, and then at the end of your life, realize that you made a mistake, kill the Emperor, and then you're redeemed. I can understand redemption, but that doesn't mean you get to become a Force ghost and come back into the light. I think that's just ridiculous. So it's really just the fact that it took the inconsistency of how one actually learns to become a Force ghost to a much higher extreme that just made it very confusing. I mean, unless someone says there are multiple ways you can do it, I just felt that entire storyline was just completely unnecessary. And heck, they got the name of the planet of the Sith wrong. I mean, it's supposed to be, they called it Morbon, but it's supposed to be Korban. I mean, how'd they mess that up? Next question comes from Corey Roloff, and you want to know, what is my least favorite PlayStation exclusive franchise? Gotta go with Gran Turismo. I've never really been a big fan of driving simulators. I'm more of an arcade racing fan, so something like a Need for Speed or Burnout is more my taste. And as good as they like to make Gran Turismo feel like, it's just never been the type of franchise that I've ever been interested in. The next question comes from Glenn Gashard, I hope I said that right, and you want to know, what are my thoughts on Resident Evil 6? Well, I will say this, Resident Evil 6 is a big improvement over Resident Evil 5, however, it did have some problems. It was separated into 4 campaigns, and I'll say this much. I don't care what anyone says. It had the best controls out of any Resident Evil game I've ever played, because we were actually allowed to move, run, gun, everything. I thought it was amazing. I don't know what people were complaining about. And Leon's campaign was undoubtedly the best, with Jake Muller's campaign being a good second, Ada's campaign being a good third, and Chris's and Pierce's campaign obviously being the worst because it was just a flat-out shooter. If anything, if anything, I think that Leon's campaign, at least the first 2 chapters, was pretty much what Resident Evil 2 was. And I hope that when the Resident Evil 2 remake comes out, I want my gameplay like that. Give me a familiar setting, but just give me this much updated gameplay. That's all I want. So, personally, overall, I liked Resident Evil 6. However, the campaign for Chris was just terrible. And they had a perfect opportunity to retire Chris, and they messed that up. I really like that scene at the end where Chris is talking to Pierce, and he says, after this mission is done, you know, I'd like you to take my place. We're at a point in time where we need to start retiring the old characters. As we moving forward, why can't we bring in new characters? We don't always have to be restricting ourselves to Chris, Jill, Leon. Why don't we have these guys retire, have a normal life? I think they've earned that. I mean, I know that they're fighters, but they're not the only ones who can combat these threats. And now that Wesker's dead, the only antagonist that connects any of them is already dead. We're just kind of doing the cleanup now. So, yeah. The next question comes from Karen Kenobi, really like that name, and you want to know, with the rumors spreading around this, should there be an Obi-Wan Kenobi trilogy of movies? Okay, I absolutely love this question because, as some of you guys know, Ewan McGregor's performance as Obi-Wan Kenobi is my all-time favorite character out of all 6 films, and I recently saw his most recent interview where he was kind of talking about the idea. But to answer your question, I would absolutely love to see an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie with Ewan McGregor returning and have it take place between episodes 3 and 4. A trilogy, though, I'm really not sure if you can do that, because really in that time period, Obi-Wan Kenobi, if it's to be believed, really wasn't doing all that much. And so what kind of story are you going to be telling? We know for a fact that what he was doing was going through the training that Yoda told him about how to contact or get in contact or communicate with Qui-Gon and Qui-Gon's spirit. And it was his old master spirit that kind of taught him how he could ascend and survive his physical death. But aside from that, there aren't really many stories. I mean, unless you want to go with the old Wounds storyline, which involves Maul finding out about Luke Skywalker and then Obi-Wan Kenobi and Maul having their final confrontation, which technically could still happen, because now that Maul has made his return in Star Wars Rebels, that could lead into Obi-Wan Kenobi coming back into the franchise. But I would love to see a story. If anything, I think the Old Wounds storyline is probably the best movie that you could build an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie around. But in terms of a trilogy, I just don't think that there's enough in that time period, even though it's about 20 years, to actually do 3 movies about him. Because if he's going to be on this planet for 3 years, you know, for 20 years, I should say, there's not many stories you could tell around that period of time. The next question comes from Kyle Zamet, and you want to know, what is my favorite Devil May Cry game and why? Oh, that's an easy one. It's Devil May Cry 3. 1 was a bit too simple. I mean, it's basic. 2 was too easy. And 4, I absolutely hated how they only used Dante for backtracking, and it pretty much just had you face all the same bosses that you did with Nero. But 3 felt like an entirely different game because it added the styles, which allowed you to play the game in multiple different ways. I absolutely love the storyline. The introduction of Dante's brother Virgil, how he got in contact with Lady, how he kind of found his own way, and most famously, how he got the name Devil May Cry for his shop. It just had the best gameplay, it had the best style. I mean, I've bought it twice, I have it on PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and I would absolutely buy it for PlayStation 4. It really just was, in my opinion, Devil May Cry 3 stands as the standard into which all hack and slash games need to be compared to. If you can't make a game as good as that game, then you don't deserve to even be acknowledged as being a great hack and slash game. That's just the standard for me. And the last question of the episode comes from Phil Marks, and you want to know, which alien army in movies and games is the most powerful in my opinion? Well, I guess in movies, even though we don't know much about it, the aliens from Independence Day seem to be the most dominant alien force that we have seen in theaters, just because of how much damage they did in the first film. And from what we've seen from the trailers from the next film, they're about to cause even more problems. And in terms of video games, it's a toss-up between... I can't say the Helghast, because the Helghast aren't really aliens, they're humanoids. I think the Covenant. I think the Covenant is probably the most threatening alien force that I've seen in a video game. I was gonna say the Chimera, but those are just glorified monsters, and we really haven't seen them evolve over time. But the Covenant is like this big religion. They actually have organization. They're not just doing things at random. So I think that the Covenant really is the most threatening alien force that we've ever seen in video games. But that's just my opinion. And with that, those are the questions you guys sent for this episode. I'd like to thank you guys for making this episode possible. If you guys have any more questions you'd like me to answer in episode 217 next Friday, be sure to type them in the comments down below. But make sure you get them into me before next Wednesday, before I start filming this. And make sure it's only one question per person. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.